Good morning, good afternoon, good evening internet, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Economical Rides. Well, we didn't get off to the most auspicious start together, but in the end, you've turned out to be a cracking bike. Hi there, stay tuned for my 1 year, 4,000 kilometre review of my 2022 Royal Enfield Classic 350. So, let's start with the looks. The bike's still looking great. Admittedly, I don't ride it in the wet, but I have washed it multiple times, and you don't always succeed in drying the bike completely when you wash it, so you can get little bits of rust in water traps. But really, this bike, after 1 year and 4,000 kilometres, to my eyes, still looks brand new. So, if you're thinking about getting a Classic 350, I can reassure you, they seem to be very well made, and if you keep them clean, they remain looking nice for a very long time. So, I'm still running the original OEM Seat tyres. These tyres have been absolutely fine. I've also heard from people who ride in wet conditions that these tyres are also fine in the wet. So I would definitely say don't worry about replacing the OEM tyres as soon as you buy the bike, because they're perfectly fine. They're more than adequate for the performance that this bike has. So a big thumbs up for the tyres, still liking those. The brakes, well, Royal Enfield seem to have a habit of making bikes with brakes which lack bite, and my Classic 350 is no exception. Having said that, on all of their bikes, even if the brakes may lack initial bite, they certainly get the job done, and that's the same here. I have actually applied both brakes in a straight line, full power, and the bike pulls up very quickly. The rear ABS activated. I'm not sure the front brake is actually strong enough to activate the front ABS. It certainly didn't in my case. Maybe on a loose surface you'd get the benefit of the ABS on the front, but certainly if you apply both brakes firmly, the bike pulls up very sharply indeed. The engine, well, the engine's been absolutely fine. Obviously I've had 3 services. The first one at 500 kilometres or 300 miles. The second one was at 6 months. And we've just had the 12-month service, the first one, as the bike turned 1 year old in February. I've had no issues at all with the engine, and now that the valves have been set and they fitted a new air filter, the engine's running really sweetly. Actually, I would say since about 4,000 kilometres, it really does feel like the engine is making full power now. Before, it always felt a little bit lackluster, but at the moment it's running really well, and it hangs on very well up the hills. Now obviously this 350 engine isn't going to be a flying machine. I would say that this bike is most comfortable in the speed range of 80 to 100 kilometers per hour. I have ridden it on the motorway flat out at 110 to 120. It will do that, but it will sip a fair bit more fuel, as I'll explain later. In terms of comfort and ergonomics, this is a very comfortable bike. I only have the standard seat, and I've been able to ride this bike for 3 hours at a time without any issues. The handlebar ergonomics are really good. The foot brake is in the right position. There is a slight issue with the gear lever, but we'll come to that later. That's an easy fix. So as you can see here, I have the red chrome version. And yeah, the chrome versions do have a little bonus. It was something I wasn't expecting. If you have a chrome version, do try and ride it through a town at night, because the reflections of the shop fronts and all the lights in the tank are quite mesmerizing. It was quite entertaining. So this these chrome versions, the chrome tank is really good fun at night time. Here's a look at the bike from the other side. Everything's very nicely finished, as mentioned in my earlier videos, and it's all holding up supremely well. In terms of suspension, we have fairly basic suspension, preload adjustable at the rear, but I've never messed with it because I always ride solo, and enclosed forks at the front. Now this is clearly budget suspension, it's not top quality gear. The front forks have no adjustment at all, by the way. But having said that, in general this bike has a very plush ride. It's more than adequate. I've even taken it off-road and it's been fine. So don't worry about the suspension. It may not be super adjustable, it may not be the best quality gear, but it's more than adequate and it does give you a comfortable ride. So this bike has a 15-litre fuel tank, and that will give you a range on average with normal mixed riding of about 350 kilometers. Do be aware that if you ride on the motorway at 100 and 110 kilometers per hour, this bike does start to drink a fair bit more. On a motorway, the range is probably going to be about 220, 230 kilometers before you'd start looking for fuel. But I find the range is adequate for my usage. Not quite as good as my Meteor, but that's a different story. And the fuel economy is going to be the same, so very little fuel consumption. And I think a 350 kilometer range is more than adequate. Fuel consumption is very good, as I said, unless you're at motorway speeds, at which point it does nosedive. I'll put up some figures here of the fuel figures you can expect with this bike, but it's pretty much exactly the same as you would get with the Meteor 350. So let's look at the instrumentation. So here on the left hand control cube we have the pass light, the normal headlight, the main beam headlight. Here we have our indicators, not self-cancelling but cancelling at the push of a button. And here down below we have the horn. Come on, we've got a big budget for this review, so we'll put the ignition on and we'll hear the horn. There you go. Just if you're a horn fetishist, that's what a horn sounds like. Over here we have the ignition kill switch, and if you turn it to the left, that's the starter position, so that engages the electric start. Below there we have the hazard warning lights. And that's all we have in terms of controls, fairly straightforward. In terms of technology, as already mentioned, we only have ABS, but it is dual channel ABS, so it works on the front and rear wheels independently. And that's about your lot. Of course, we do have electronic fuel injection, so no carburetors to tinker with, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending how you see that. I'll show you quickly the instrument display. So here we have another one of these Royal Enfield mixed displays. So we have an analog speedo here, and down below we have a LCD section. In the LCD section we have various trip meters. At the moment we are showing the time. This is the total kilometers, just over 40,000. This is trip meter 1, trip meter 2. This is back to the clock. There's also a third trip meter F, which starts counting the kilometers once the fuel gauge reaches the first bar. So that's kind of like a reserve odometer, fuel reserve odometer, but you won't see that here. Obviously we have the fuel gauge at the top. Here you have your idiot lights with your neutral gear position, battery voltage, ABS and ECU warning light. There's no gear indicator on this bike, unfortunately, unlike the Meteor. So yeah, that's a little bit annoying because sometimes I am uncertain whether I'm in 4th or 5th gear. So sometimes I change up and I'm already in 5th gear. A gear indicator would definitely have been helpful, but for some reason they decided they couldn't cram one in there. On the Meteor, by the way, it's in the LCD part down below. So that's pretty much it. There's not a lot to talk about really, because it's not a super complicated bike. It's very analog in terms of riding. So I mentioned in the intro that the bike and I didn't have an auspicious start together. So now I'm going to shed some light on that in case you didn't know. And I'm going to tackle the issues that I've had with this bike in the first 12 months of ownership. Now don't worry, it was nothing too horrific. So the first problem I had with this bike was actually on collection day. When I picked the bike up, it was late afternoon, and on the way home it turned dark. That was when I realised that the headlight was actually illuminating the front mudguard and not the road ahead. So I had a rather sketchy ride home, not really being able to see where the next bend was, but we survived that okay, and the solution was quite straightforward. There's this screw here. If you adjust that against your back garage wall with the light on, you can move the beam up to where you'd want it to be. I parked this bike next to my Meteor, set the Meteor's beam to the wall, and adjusted this headlight to be at the same level. So it was just an annoying little thing, it wasn't anything serious. I was able to adjust it the same day with a Phillips head screwdriver at home. So the second little annoyance was that immediately upon collecting the bike, I really struggled for space between the footrest and the gear lever. Now, if you ride with boots, as I do, there's really not much space to get your toe underneath the gear lever in the standard OEM position. So, within a couple of rides, I decided this wasn't really workable and something needed to be done. So normally you would just undo this bolt, take the gear lever off the spline, move it up a position, put it back on, thereby giving yourself a bit more space. Fine, that's okay, you can do that, but it's a new bike, why do I have to do that? Not only that, on this bike it's not that straightforward, because you cannot pull this lever off the spline because this footrest bracket is in the way. So the only way to get this off the spline is to take a bolt out of this rear bolt out of the lower subframe, take that bolt out, push the whole frame down using the footrest. You might be able to get it off then, but in my case it didn't quite clear. I couldn't get it off, so I ended up having to loosen the front frame bolts as well. So I undid this one, just loosened it off, took this one almost all the way out, and then I was able to push down, get the gear lever off the spline, move it up, push it back on, and then pinch it back up. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying that you have to move the gear lever position. Any Royal Enfield Classic 350 owner you meet has probably already done this to their bike as well, and it's not helped by the fact that simply removing the lever can't be done. You have to start taking or loosening off frame bolts to be able to do it. So it's a little bit annoying, and it would be helpful if the factory would fit the gear lever in a slightly more ergonomic position. But other than that, the ergonomics were fine, as I mentioned. That was just one little annoyance that was needing to be rectified almost straight away. Having said that, I had a badly adjusted headlight from delivery, and like every other Classic 350 owner, I've had to move the gear lever myself. The only other issue I've had, the only actual genuine issue, was with the speedo. Now this is a common problem, the sticky speedo problem. Now normally when the speedo is working properly, it does this. It does a full sweep and returns to zero. Now when you have a sticky speedo, it sweeps beyond 160 kilometers and returns somewhere around here. So then zero is at 40 kilometers per hour, and you basically don't know your actual speed. Now this has happened to me twice. The first time I was able to rectify it by switching the ignition off and on multiple times, and eventually the speedo did calibrate correctly. But the second time it happened, it was terminal. It just wouldn't go away. It just kept sticking at about 30 kilometers per hour. So something needed to be done. Now a lot of people have had this issue, and Royal Enfield has replaced a lot of speedos, but it's possible that the speedos don't actually need to be replaced. So my fix for the problem was that you just access the speedo connector, you take the speedo connector apart, you spray both sides, you put it back together, and since I did that, the speedo went straight back to zero, calibrated correctly, and the problem hasn't reoccurred. The problem seems to manifest itself when the bike, certainly in my case, the problem seems to manifest itself when the bike has been stood in the sun for any length of time. So it seems to be heat related, but lots of people have had the issue. They all seem to have different theories on when it happens, But so far on my bike, taking the connector apart, cleaning it with some contact cleaner spray, putting it back together, solved the problem, and I haven't had the problem now for 7 months. So that's a possible fix for you. It's just one of the very few issues that these bikes tend to have. It's quite widespread, so just be aware of that. So really, apart from the speedo issue, which was actually a technical failure, the bike has been faultless. A couple of little niggles, as I mentioned, and all of these things happened fairly early on in the day, which is why I said in the intro we didn't get off to the best start. But ever since then, the bike has been really, really good. It's really coming on song now at 4,000 kilometers. I just really enjoy riding it. It sounds fantastic. I'll give you a little demo of the sound in a minute. So overall, yeah, the first year with this bike got off to a shaky start, but I'm more than happy with it, and I would thoroughly recommend it to anyone who's interested in buying one. In terms of the community on my channel, we're not hearing about a lot of issues with these bikes at all. The speedo issue is the most common one, so I think you can buy with confidence. If the bike appeals to you, I see no reason why I wouldn't recommend that you get one. So there you go, that was my brief little 1 year revisiting of the Classic 350, a review if you like. That's the kind of thing you can expect, really no major issues at all. Be aware that there might be a speedo issue, but there are possibly fixes that you can do yourself. It's a 5-minute job to remove the headlight, disconnect the speedo, spray both sides of the connector, put it back together, put the headlight back in. It's not the end of the world. Other than that, we've had no issues. Nothing to stop me riding the bike. It hasn't had to go back to the dealer for any work at all. Just the regular servicing. Servicing might be an issue for some people. It is a 6-month service interval on these bikes. They come with a 3-year warranty and 3-year roadside assistance. So most people are going to get their bikes dealer maintained for the warranty period at least. So be aware of that, 6-month service intervals. But certainly here in Spain, services aren't expensive. The small service every 6 months cost me about 70 euros, and the annual service where they do the valve check and they change lots of consumables like filters, air filters and things, that's cost me about 170 euros. So it's okay. It would be nice if the intervals were annual, but currently they're not. I think once the bike is out of warranty, I'll just do an annual oil change, probably a half-yearly air filter check and clean, and then every year I'll change the air filter as well as the oil. With the mileage that I'm doing, I think that should be more than adequate. So there you go. After a slightly dodgy start, the Classic 350 and I have become great friends. I really do enjoy it. It's giving me that classic biking experience that I was hoping to get from my Bullet 500, but which never materialized because my Bullet 500 was so terribly unreliable. This is like a classic biking experience without any of the grief. The bike just works. It's great fun to ride. It sounds awesome. And yeah, I'm very happy with it. So Classic 350, it worked out in the end. We're best friends now. So I hope you found this little summary after 1 year with this bike helpful. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. If you liked it or found it useful, please give me a like. If you're new to the channel, I recommend that you subscribe. I have this Classic 350, I also have a Meteor 350, and I do videos with both bikes. I'm situated in Spain, as you can possibly tell, so you also get to see some nice Spanish countryside from time to time. Oh, another thing as well, at the end of most of my videos, my dog Ruby gets a sausage. So yeah, there's that as well, which is a big plus, obviously. So I'm off home now to get Ruby her sausage. Bye bye. Blimey, Ruby, our friends Scott and Wolfie have gone mad. They've sent you all these sausages. Look at that. Thanks, Scott and Wolfie, that's amazing. Would you like one of Scott and Wolfie's sausages? New sausages? Silly question. Sausages. Say thank you, Scott and Wolfie. Thank you, Scott and Wolfie. Nice one. To wait.